Continue through Chris and his psyche and psychosis, if I'm being completely honest about these articles. But we move on, as now we have to discuss Chris and his conflicting ideas about mental health care, because as we sort of discussed a little bit previously, a lot of Chris's sense of self-care seemed to only amount to people telling him that he can do no wrong, and therefore it's going to make him feel good about himself. Like, I don't know how often Chris has ever been like, probably more occasions about things like tough love, but whether any of these sort of things stuck is a different subject matter entirely, because it's probably not very often. Okay, here we go. First of all, the article is out of date, so I apologize in advance, because it means that there might be some things that might be inaccurate, and we might have to play the game of fill in the spaces. We need information on gender dysphoria, HRT, Valium in meds section, and the effect jail has had upon him. Probably, we'll try our best with some of these. Chris, in 2008, my current church can help me a lot better than any professional because God and Jesus supports them as well. That's already flying off the handles into unhinged territory right there. And then 2018, I am only going to say this once for those who may think me as delusional, crazy, or shit like that. I am not delusional, crazy, or anything of the sort. I have my own magic powers that I am still learning about for myself, from my family and allies. I've already talked to a psychiatrist and therapist years ago, so any new such meetings would be a very moot point. Yeah, that just about says it all right there, but let's keep going. Anyway, Chris has had a troubled relationship with mental health professionals, both psychologists and psychiatrists. He claims that he was held down by the school psychologist in grade school while his screams were recorded, and was forced to see a psychologist for anger management classes after being kicked out of Piedmont, Virginia Community College. Chris has refused, however, to see a psychologist of his own volition in the past, opting to see Rocky Shoemaker, his pastoral counselor, instead. The sole exception occurred in 2016, when Chris went to a gender psychologist over his transgender issues. Chris's various runs-in with the law have resulted in mandated therapy, such as the therapeutic docket. However, Chris has failed to adjust his behavior from such sessions. And this is also, by the way, an artist's interpretation of Chris's stint in jail due to his erratic behavior caused by mental health issues. Notice how they're all there with them, and fortunately there's a window and Bob is just sort of looking in a bit deterred almost by this whole arrangement. And as you can see right here, there's a lot to go through, so one at a time. The problems with Chris, many. An insight into Chris's tortured psyche, from possible hallucinations, the distortion of his characters, what I think is meant to be, is that Roach meant to be in the background? Possibly. Liquid Chris, Mary Lee Walsh, Bob, and Rose Chew. Basically demons all throughout, manifested into how his soul almost looks sort of like a compilation of probably what he saw when Roach locked him in the closet when he was only a child. In his own mind, Chris claims to be autistic, homophobic, as a genuine phobia, and a victim of noviophobia, a made-up phobia of girls having boyfriends. He also diagnosed himself with dissociative identity disorder in the August 13th captain's log, although he later revealed in Mailbag issue 4 that it was a lie to momentarily derail the trolls. Once again, Chris proved that he had no understanding of how serious mental disorders can be. Pretending to be crazy is an odd sort of catch-22. Possibly because to arrive at such a conclusion is maddening anyway, but since you're obviously not, then what? Also, another insight into Chris's tortured psyche. I don't know, well, obviously meant to be a hand, possibly over a motherboard, disguised as a maze, also within the confines of what looks like a plant, or possibly the earth. As though whatever grasp Chris might possibly have is slowly withering away into something that's meant to be tangible and solid. Well, that's my take anyway. And also, whoever did this did like a fantastic job. I mean, look at the detailing on this. It's no secret that Chris has always had a very childish mindset and views growing up as some sort of epic, arduous challenge. But it wasn't until a conversation with Casey that we knew just how serious this was. According to Chris, as a child, he never had any serious issues of what he wanted to be when he grew up, something all healthy children consider at one point or another. Nor did the thought of becoming an adult ever truly cross his mind. This implies that Chris may have thought that he would remain a child forever. You could possibly say he is still the world's oldest child. In many ways. Chris also seems to be at the level of incompetence that prevents him from realizing how incompetent he truly is. A Cornell University Psychologist journal details the phenomenon. When people are incompetent, the strategies they adopt to achieve success are satisfaction. They suffer a dual burden. Not only do they reach erroneous conclusions and make unfortunate choices, but their incompetence robs them of the ability to realize it. A disturbing, albeit too familiar, case that is more accurate to the account of Chris's reaction to reality, as we'll see coming up. The 2004 summary. We're nearly up to the 20th anniversary of that as well. That's pretty cool. The psychiatrist who compiled a survey of Chris's issues following his troubles at PVCC in 2004 echoed the diagnosis of autism that Chris received sometime in his youth, and took note of an obsessional quality to his preoccupation with finding a girlfriend. He also administered a Folstein test, a brief questionnaire designed to detect cognitive impairment. Chris racked up a perfect score, indicating no problems with his memory or basic information processing abilities. On the Global Assessment of Functioning, the doctor rated Chris a 70, roughly halfway between an average adult and someone with socially debilitating mental illness. Yikes. Later onset gender dysphoria, and the article is yet to be complete due to stress. And this image right here just somehow never gets old. Or any yes yeller. History of medication. According to the 2004 psychiatric survey, at some point in his life, Chris was prescribed the antidepressant medication imperamine. It's not clear when he was prescribed the drug or for what exact reason, but it was likely sometime in his younger days, since the advent of more sophisticated antidepressant drugs like Prozac in the late 1980s. The use of imperamine to treat depression and other psychological disorders has grown less and less common. The same document notes that as of 2004, Chris had been taking the antidepressant Paxil for 4 years in order to deal with his stress and anger issues. One of the survey's recommendations was an increase in his daily dose of the drug, but it's not clear how long Chris continued taking it afterward. In Mailbag 13, he explained that he had switched to a different medication in order to avoid some of Paxil's side effects. The ones that only hit adults, however, in his 11th call with Casey, Chris said that the drug he switched to from Paxil is paroxetine, since Paxil is just one of paroxetine's several trade names and not a different drug. It seems that Chris is still taking the same medication, only under a different appellation. Chris didn't specify what side effects Paxil caused him, but his language suggests some sort of sexual dysfunction. Paxil may have been making it difficult for Chris to achieve orgasm. If his current antidepressant is still paroxetine, or at least another SSRI, then it might explain why it took him around 20 minutes in order to climax when he cybered with Julie. Though, again, the less said about that, probably the better. Another of Paxil's more notable side effects is the potential for substantial weight gain, which couldn't have mixed well with Chris's diet and sedentary lifestyle. Past instances of professional help, or lack thereof. One of the most frustrating elements of Chris in his adamant refusal to take help from any source, in the aftermath of his suspension from the PVCC, his evaluators repeatedly recorded further counselling and psychiatric treatment, but Chris and his parents refused. It seems that Bob thinks that the world of mental health has evolved past the turn of the century treatment of straitjackets and lobotomies. The only thing close to therapy that Chris has ever had was a compulsory anger management class, and we all know how much good that did. Not very much. About the only authority figure he listened to was Rocky Shoemaker, his pastoral counselor. He claimed that he had no need for psychotherapy because his pastor is better at helping him than anyone. You know, years of training and experience in helping people with psychiatric problems. Chris and Rocky, however, parted ways in around 2011, meaning that probably Chris was roaming around completely unchecked for years. He's shown repeated disregard for the authority of health professionals. There's a shock. It is suspected that, even if Chris received professional help, he would disregard most of it and undermine their therapy. It seems Chris only acknowledges his personal flaws if they get him pity or to demonstrate that he's beaten them already. Things we know fine well he won't do, and things he's proved that have not happened anyway. So again, that's a pretty moot point in itself. Notice how often Chris claims to have won the battle over autism, only to fall back on, "I have autism," as an excuse. Similarly, he wrote Nintendo Power magazine to tell them he conquered his noviophobia, only to say later that his fear came back like a boomerang. Regardless of how blatantly stupid his actions are, regardless of how often trolls, including a 13-year-old boy and con artists such as the Idea Guys, trick him into doing horrible, horrible things, regardless of how any mental health worker worth their salt would pin Chris down like a butterfly to get a chance to crack open his impenetrable shell of fail, Chris will carry on as usual, justifying away everything that they would inconvenience him in the slightest. Chris has no problem telling other people to seek professional help. However, in the mailbag, he has occasionally responded to his detractors with retorts like, "Go see a psychiatrist." Funnily enough, were Chris to ever see a psychoanalyst, he or she would probably see this as a classic Freudian projection. And in case, by the way, for those who are at all concerned about what a Freudian projection was, it is essentially where feelings are directed towards the self and displaced towards other people. So it's one of the most common defense mechanisms that the human psyche can produce. Unfortunately, for the case of Chris, he seems to have taken this one further, in which everything is everybody else's fault, and the only accountability he will take is when he has actually done something credible and people aren't just taking the piss with him. Nathaniel Green Elementary School. When Chris attended NGES, there was an incident where he was supposedly restrained or molested, depending on whom you talk to. It has been claimed by Bob that they wanted to send Chris to an institution. What they meant was likely a place where Chris could see professionals who could work with Chris's problems, as opposed to teachers who deal with more normal students. What Bob probably thought is he would be sent to a nut house. Either way, something that could have done some good in his early development that just did not happen. Mary Lee Walsh. Although not a mental health professional herself, Walsh has experience at dealing with a large body of students and their individual problems. She also has written a book on coping with college life. Despite her advanced knowledge and experience, Chris chose the better path of cursing her and putting her low on his scale of respect. Psychiatric papers. Following his outburst towards Mary Lee Walsh, Chris was sent to a psychiatrist for evaluation. The resulting papers easily showed a number of things, most of which can easily be told by trolls themselves. Another interesting thing is that, despite the encouragement to follow up on this, Chris's parents refused to on the account of insurance problems. Or they didn't want to ensure that Chris could have been mistaken as someone who was drastically sick and needed serious attention. The documents note that at some point, Chris received psychiatric evaluation at the Center for Learning Potential in Mount Sidney, Virginia, a small town in northeast Augusta County that's 50 miles west of his Ruckersville home. They don't say when this took place, but given the location of the center, it was likely either during his elementary school years or sometime after the Chandlers moved back to Charlottesville in the summer of 2000. Anger management and the shrink. Following his encounter with Mary Lee Walsh, he was ordered to take anger management classes. The only thing that seemed to arise from it were complaints that he had to pay to see a professional, and, well, he still can't control his anger. There's very little information about his anger management classes as it occurred during his pre-ED days, and is only mentioned in a few old documents of Chris that have surfaced. He's never really talked about it since, and it's never come up in comics or videos. I don't think it's the sort of thing Chris would want to get into if he was doing, let's say, I don't know, his memoirs or something like that. Rocky Shoemaker. Religious institutions are fond of proving counseling services to all members of their congregations, sometimes unwisely as a method of hammering them with doctrine to solve their problems, sometimes beneficially by giving them a person to talk to for free and referring them to a real professional if necessary. Whether Rocky is genuinely beneficial or harmful to the people who come to see her is uncertain. But she is certainly admired for her past work. What remains certain is that she was probably not the best solution for Chris because, 1. He considered her to be a perfect, all-encompassing alternative to a qualified professional. 2. He barely listened to anything she ever said. 3. He misconstrued everything she said, accepting advice he liked and ignoring advice he didn't like. She told him about his past habits being unacceptable, but Chris remained as determined as ever to be a total idiot, even after just refusing to listen to somebody that he said he trusted. Although she put a stop to trolling plans, his behavior remained very much the same. She also told him it would be a good idea to stop posting videos on YouTube, since they only feed the trolls. That hasn't really worked out now, has it? About the only other thing he took away from their sessions is that he can fuck someone before they are married. Okay, but despite the fact that this has only very rarely happened, but there you are. Also, it really says something, again, back on 4chan back in the days. What do you get when you cross a mentally ill loner with a... Okay. Yeah, it took me a while to realise that was from Joker, but I don't think Chris looks like he was joking around. Chris mentioned in a video from October 2009 and told Casey in a phone call in September of that same year that he had been taking some relationship management classes. Undoubtedly, Chris felt that he had found some form of real-life dating ed. In reality, Chris came upon a class meant for couples who wanted to manage their already established relationships as opposed to finding out how to get into one. It's not much about I can add to that. White Knights and Trolls. If it doesn't take a lot of effort for anyone to see that Chris has virtually no common sense. Likewise, common sense being rather common, White Knights and Trolls alike are often quick to point out that most of what Chris does is stupid, insane, or socially abnormal. To put it bluntly, he doesn't get it. As a result of not getting it, many trolls have become armchair psychologists pondering why exactly he doesn't get it. It doesn't matter what they come up with, the result is always that Chris doesn't listen to anyone if he doesn't want to. Some White Knights like Vivian G and Escal have gotten so fed up with Chris's adamant refusal to improve himself or heed advice that they turn troll or ween instead. Very much true. Even I think there is some like Otaku King, I think is like a current detractor of Chris is even like is starting to like have enough of him. It's funny how that works. Court mandated therapy for a 2011 assault and battery case. The conditions of Chris's plea bargain in July 2012 required him to undergo psychiatric treatment and evaluation, but it seems to have had little effect. Court mandated therapy from 2014. Chris makes mention of therapy in his video Group Embargo on GameStop, Best Buy and Simon Shopping Centers, and it was reported by observers viewing his July 23rd court hearing. The mental health group he attended was On Our Own of Charlottesville. gender psychologist. During 2016, Chris met with a gender psychologist who referred to him that he is transgender. That might be one of the very few cases where somebody just straight up says, well, if you're saying that, then that must be true. And then again, the whole process of actually going to psychologists about gender dysphoria is a very complicated matter and is something that should be more closely examined by those who are actually transgender or those who do have gender dysphoria issues. Court mandated therapy from 2018 mall trespassing case. Chris was directed to the therapeutic docket program and required to meet a psychiatrist and therapy group between July of 2018 to April of 2019. However, he failed to benefit from the resources, instead retreating further to his imaginary world and the bad actors validating his beliefs. Dr. Wolf. Chris acted out a therapy session with fictional brony character Dr. Wolf in February of 2019, entitled A Moment with Dr. Wolf, Chris Chan and Greater Struggles, which was a video that Chris did entirely of Lego bricks and characters, and like I mentioned before, he seems to consider himself a source of therapy, and as opposed to doing what he should have done, like taking their own advice, it more sort of boils down to Chris almost trying to have to validating himself in the guise of somebody else. Western State Hospital. On the 28th of February 2022, Chris was transferred from Central Virginia Regional Jail to Western State Hospital. While details were initially scarce, Chris eventually confirmed he had been sent there to make him sufficiently competent to stand trial. Notably, the day before Chris returned to jail, staff members pinned him to the floor, which reminded him of a similar incident at Nathaniel Green Elementary. He has gone on record to state that if they aren't wiped out by the dimensional merge, he would sue the mental hospital in retribution. Later on, Chris claimed that the Western State Hospital was expected to place him in a group home but instead sent him back to jail, allegedly to free up a room. Once again, he accused hospital staff of being abusive as fuck and arrogantly shit-minded with their patients. Whether or not any of this is true, given Chris is a known liar, has yet to be proven. Gateway homes. Now this gateway homes. Now this is specifically referring to Chris being in the current in the current home he's meant to be in, and it's just about where Chris can actually like function in some small way in the outside world. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was Chris and mental health care. And to be completely honest, ladies and gentlemen, what a complete waste. A complete waste of American taxpayers' money, who pay hundreds of thousands of taxpayers' dollars just to send people like Chris to therapy, who don't take advantage of anything they're told, who simply get force-fed things that Chris probably just wants to hear so he can feel good about himself, and then every single time he does something stupid, he always gets psychiatric treatment anyway, and the sequence of events goes is that all that will actually appease Chris is just lie to him and say he's alright, or at least do it in such a way that Chris will believe it, as opposed to the alternative. As opposed to the trolls just continually stroking Chris's ego, and from 2007 till probably the very end of time itself. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope all of you guys have enjoyed this article about Chris and mental health care, and I cannot wait to see all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now.